All right, guys, we're joined by Peter Swindell. Peter played on the 2016 Eclipse team and just graduated this spring at Loyola. And he's actually going to be going back to Loyola and doing grad school, since the season was cut short this year and he has another year of eligibility. He's going back to do that. So, Peter, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, awesome. And I was asking, Peter about all his accolades, and the first thing he said to me was that he graduated magna cum laude, 3.7 GPA. So, Peter, congrats on that, man. That's awesome.
Thank you. I was really excited about it.
Yeah, I know. I can tell. So first off, we wanted to talk about kind of your experience playing with Eclipse and, what kind of benefits being part of Eclipse provided you.
Yeah. So what's interesting about it was I was kind of on the, I started Eclipse. The first year was started going from freshman to sophomore year. So I've been there since the start. It's obviously progressed a lot since then, but, right away when I started to join Eclipse, I knew it was the best decision for me. Playing with a bunch of guys from my own high school and from all across Connecticut, Fairfield County, specifically was awesome to do. You get to play with guys. I played with great people at New Canaan High School, but you get all these guys from different towns and the best coaches in Connecticut. It definitely helped progress my game.
Yeah, that's great. So you mentioned the best coaches in Connecticut. Interesting question here. Who is your favorite Eclipse coach and why?
I mean, obviously, I can't say you because you couldn't coach me in high school because I was playing for you. But I don't think I ever had a bad coach in Eclipse. I think they're all great. But one that sticks out was Mike Regan, and I had known Mike Regan a little bit before joining Eclipse, but I'd never had him as a coach. And he's one of the guys that I emulated my game after, and still talk to this day. He played at the highest level. He played in the MLL, NLL, and actually Team USA indoor. So he got to the highest level you possibly can. And one of the things that's cool about Mike Regan is he played midfield. And I think his game throughout his life never stopped developing. After he graduated college, it continued to get better and better. And he still has that drive today that he can still get better. And that's one thing that I kind of took to heart is, you're never up there. You always can get to that next step better. And he gave me a ton of different tips, whether it was during tournaments, during practices, or even off the field and stuff like that. So it was definitely cool to learn from him. And he's one of the most successful guys in our sport. So it was really amazing having him as a coach then.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear, about a guy who kind of became like a role model for you and somebody you wanted to, model your game after, being one of your Eclipse coaches like that. So that's pretty special. Looking at where we are right now and kind of the club landscape, there's a lot of like stress and anxiety around the recruiting process. And, I know your process, and it was one of the more unique, paths to you to get into Loyola. And, I think it'd be great for some of our high school guys to kind of hear about your process. So if you could talk about that, that'd be great.
Yeah. So I think, 8 years ago, whenever it was kind of the beginning of this early recruiting. Kids in my grade were committing in as early as 8th grade. And by the time the end of sophomore years, a lot of teams had most of their slots filled up. So it was a little bit stressful on that point. So I actually committed to Loyola at the end of my sophomore year. And I always wanted to play at the highest level, always wanted to play D1. But I think that, maybe I wasn't getting as many looks as other people. One thing that I wanted to keep to heart was, sorry.
Swindy, sorry. So you said, I think you said at the end of your sophomore year is when you committed.
End of my senior year, I committed to Loyola. So I was the last person to commit in my Loyola class. It was stressful in some ways, but I think that one thing that I kept with me at all times was, no matter what happens, I'm just going to keep trying to develop my game day in and day out. And I definitely became a better player every year of high school. And a large part of that was due to Eclipse. So it was stressful, but in the back of my mind, I was like, if I do everything that I can to get better, be a good person, be a good student, something was going to pop up. And playing a game down in Baltimore senior year, somebody connected to Loyola was at the game and helped start that connection. And Jamie Hanford, who's an Eclipse coach, actually went to Loyola, and he talked to Coach Toomey and Coach Dwan about me. So it was hard, but, the number one thing that I had to keep in the back of my mind was just keep developing as a player. Don't worry about everything that's going on outside in recruiting. If I do my job, something will pop up, and luckily it did.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. It is going, that late into the process. I know, we spoke earlier, your first time visiting was, while Loyola was playing in the Patriot League tournament and
Yeah.
in your senior year of high school, right? So that's basically the end of the college season almost. So it's pretty crazy to think that was your process, that it was that, late in the process, but then you go on to have such success at Loyola, and, you'll have another season next year, but to be a captain this year, there is pretty awesome. And to be on the field all 4 years you were in college, you were playing in games, but you were the last guy on the spot. So I think for the guys coming through our program, that's a cool example to see that not everybody's process is the same, right? And you start seeing all these commitments online, and you see all this, this guy's going there and he's going there and how many spots are left, but you just kept your head down, you kept working hard, and you were rewarded for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of people see, these people that commit earlier in their careers, and it's one of those things where it's like, if you look at them and think that everyone's doing that, it could get stressful. But knowing that, I mean, my college coaches specifically, they always say they don't get caught up in the early recruiting. They think that sometimes the late bloomers or the kids that they get at the end of their recruiting classes are some of the best kids and the most hungry kids to get better. I remember when I showed up to move-in day freshman year, all my classmates were like, never met you before. We talked on text and in group chats, but they were saying we had no idea who you were. We never met you before. So it was unique in that perspective. But I think that maybe if you commit early, that's amazing. But for me, committing late, it always gave me an extra drive, and it pushed me to become better right as I stepped on campus. I wanted to prove a point, and it's something that I'm really proud of.
Yeah, you definitely should be proud of that. Thinking about your game, right? You mentioned earlier, learned from Mike Regan and wanted to play like he did. And, you just talked about how hard you worked and wanted to make a point that, you were a great pick and you were a great guy, even though you were late in the process. If you think about kind of one skill within your game, one skill set you've got that helped lead to your success on the collegiate level, what would that skill set be? And then also, how did you go about developing that skill set?
Yeah, I'd like to think as myself as a versatile player. Being a midfielder, a lot in the college game today. There's offensive midfield specifically and defensive midfielders specifically. And one thing that I tried to do throughout my career was, develop both sides of that game. And I think one thing that ties them both together are ground balls. And I know it's not important in something like that and something you can't really work on. I think that it was one thing that helped me be successful at the college level. There's a lot of hard practices and you're not always going to be successful every single rep. And if I was ever having a bad day in practice, my mindset was just go get the next ground ball. And, ground balls are the most important part of the game. That's something that we drive at Loyola. But, just getting that ground ball, the tough ground ball, going down, getting low, knowing that you're going to get checked in the wrist and knowing that you're going to get checked in the hands. It might hurt a little bit, but, you get that possession and your team has an extra possession that the other team doesn't. So I think that it kind of helped me develop into a two-way midi in some sense where, I could go on the wings. I could play a little bit of defense and run the field, and it made us a better team. We have a bunch of type of players like that at Loyola, but I think it's one thing as a young midfielder, just thinking about the small plays, thinking about getting that ground ball is something will help you develop majorly.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting to hear. I thought maybe it was, from a goal scorer like you, an offensive threat like you are, I thought, it was going to be some offensive skill, but that's awesome to hear that you can, kind of refocus yourself on a bad day by saying, you know what, I'm going to make this gritty, tough play. And it flips a switch, and all of a sudden you start getting a little mojo going based off of that. Last thing I wanted to talk about, you talked about a little bit when we talked about your process, but what would be your advice to a high school player? I'm going to get a little specific here, but a high school player that's going through the recruiting process, and maybe his buddies or his teammates or the guys he plays with in high school are getting offers and getting looks and are getting recruited, and he kind of feels like he's not getting the interest that he wanted. What would your advice be, based on your experience? What would your advice be for a guy in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like I'm talking to myself when I was a junior and senior in high school. But the best number one thing I'd say is don't stress. Everything works out for a reason. Just try to get better each day. I know a lot of people say go hit the wall for 15 minutes and stuff like that. A lot of times going out and shooting would actually clear my mind and help me forget about that. And just knowing that if I can get better and do my part, hopefully something will work out. And in my case, but I think making the small plays, being a good kid, getting good grades, it sounds not that hard and important, but everything kind of works out in that way where they look at you as a whole individual. They don't look at how many goals do you score, how many saves do you have, how many caused turnovers do you have. They're looking for the whole individual. So I think if you can become a well-rounded person, it's definitely going to help your recruiting process. But don't stress. Everything works out, and just keep developing your game. Get out there for 15 minutes a day, like I just said. It'll help you clear your mind if you're getting stressed about it. But in the end, just know everything's going to work out in your way. It's going to all end up right.
That's fantastic advice. Peter, we really appreciate you being on here. I know you're a guy that, all of Eclipse, we take a lot of pride watching you play on TV and seeing you out there battling against all your Eclipse buddies on TV. Yeah. It's pretty special. So thanks again for joining us and providing that insight and that advice for our younger guys.
No problem. It was an honor being on here. Get back with the Eclipse team. It's been a couple of years.
All right. I'll see you, buddy. Good job.
All righty.